Hello, my name is Manuel Corso. I'm a CM major at BYUI, and today I'll be speaking about my internship experience with BHI on a solar site. So this internship, the duration of it is 3 months. I'm coming up on my last week, second to last week, and today I would like to talk about 4 main things that I learned during my internship. Actually, it's going to be 5. And these things I'm going to be covering in this video is what construction management is really about. Safety is number 1 in construction. Loose ends, redesign is the worst, and the importance of processes. So first and foremost is what construction management is really like. During my internship, I got the opportunity to be inside the office with the CMs, with the PDs, and most of the time I was with the field engineer, where I got to learn what it's like to manage manpower. The where, when, what, how much, who, and why. So all of this is what are you gonna do with all the manpower, all the hours that you're putting into this project. On the site, we had on average 160 people every single day working 10 hours. And there were about 7 crews, 7 different things that people were doing, or 7 different foremans. And inside those crews, they were performing multiple tasks. So you had to keep track of what everyone was doing, when they're doing it, and where they're doing it, because you don't want people working on the same site or the same block. So in my case, I was working on a solar site with 96 blocks. So all those blocks had to have the panels put up, have to have wires run through the panels, and the wires was the whole process. So that would be people laying out the wire, people putting clips so you can pull the wire and manage it behind the panel. You had to connect the modules one to another, so it would create a loop, a series of modules that would then send energy to a combiner box and then to an inverter. And you had to have all this process in an order, and you had to manage the people so they wouldn't be on the same place, and you have people pulling wire when there were not even wire like rolled out or clips where you could pull the wire. So I learned how to organize all that. So when you would go on a block, if you were in a crew, you would be there and do what you're supposed to do rather than just be there and be like, hey, I'm actually not ready to do this because the crew before me never came here. So that would happen a lot, and you would have to meet with the foremen, let them know what they were going to be at. That was usually in the morning meetings, or also in a meeting after 4, which is called a pod. And you would just have to keep track of where each task was and a percentage of each block, so you would not like overlap or create confusions between foremen. So you got to know that time is money, especially when you're paying 160 people. You do not want to be paying people to just be sitting around, not be ready to work, not have the materials. That's something very important that I also learned about construction management. You need to have the right amount of materials. You don't want to have too much, so you just have it laying around and it's just there. And it can be like an obstruction for people, but you also don't want to not have enough so that when you get to a job, you can perform it the way it's supposed, and you have to wait for material. So that's something very important to avoid bottlenecks where people are just stuck because they're trying to get through a task and they just can't. And now that I'm touching on this, I want to talk about loose ends. I think during my internship, I saw a lot that people would go to a block, they would manage wire, and then they would go to a row of panels that didn't have the wire for them to manage, and they would skip that, and they would say, hey, we just have this row that which wasn't managed, but we'll keep going. They'll finish the block, they'll go to the next block, leave other rows because they don't have wires, they don't have clips. And that became a problem for us as a company because people would forget to go to those blocks because they thought they were already claimed. And in our data sheets, we saw that they weren't actually like all the way complete. So we would have to go back and do it, pull a crew, and take them from block 96 to block 8 to finish that, and that was a waste of time, that was a waste of money because you're paying those people. So as soon as you have loose ends, try and get the person who's trying to do the task that was before you to come, just one person, go do it, and try and leave the block at 100% for your task, because that could create a little bit of bottlenecks and loose ends that could later affect you. In my case, I'm also helping the commissioners for the inverters, and oftentimes we ran into blocks that didn't have rows managed, that all the combiner boxes were not plugged in, so we couldn't commission all of the block 100%. We couldn't claim that because of those blocks that were not fully managed, and that became a problem for the company that was commissioning, which is Sungrove. We didn't think as BHI that would be a problem until they told us we're not going to the next block until everything's done. So that's when things started to go a little bit wrong, and we had to start pulling people away from their blocks. They were probably like at 60, 70, and they had to come all the way back to block number 1, block number 5, and that could create some problems with companies that you're working with. Now I will touch up with safety is number 1 in construction. Of course, you don't want people getting injured. You want people to show up every single day to work and the day after, because that's how sites are built, by having people show up every single day and doing their tasks. You don't want any equipment damage. You don't want to perform a task in an unsafe way that could damage you or the equipment, because that's also going to prevent you from the next day coming and using that equipment to perform your work. I noticed during my internship that we talk about safety all the time. Every single morning meeting we would have a safety topic. It would either be dehydration, wearing your PPE, having a spotter, speed limit. You just gotta constantly remind people of the hazards that they can encounter during their day, like they're performing their activities. So you always gotta remind them of those things, wear their glasses, wear their helmets. You never know when you're gonna get smacked with a wire. So it's very important for you to do that. And very important to also fill out JSAs, because, well, those are things that are very important. So every day you go into the field, you gotta know what the hazards are and how you can eliminate them so that you can perform your job in the best way possible. Redesign is the worst. I learned this, that it can be very expensive, it can confuse people, and it's just something that the better you deal with it, the better the project is going to run. So always be sure you're on the same note with the contractor when you're working with redesigns. Be sure to be prepared for it. It's a little bit hard sometimes, but always keep close contact with the contractor in case there's a redesign on their way or something similar to that. And lastly, the most important thing I learned during my internship is the importance of processes. When I first started, I was pulling wire, managing wire, and there was like a certain size for the loops that we would do with the wire before the connections, and they told me it cannot be too big and it cannot be too small. So I learned from talking with a lot of people that all of these things they learn throughout failure. Failure in construction is probably one of the best things that could happen, so that you can avoid problems in the future. As soon as you find something that is not right, that is not going to work, the sooner you'll prevent from that happening in the future. So whatever the company is telling you to do is because they failed at that task before and they found a better way to do it. For the loops, the wire, if it was too long, it could be rubbing with the metal, and that's wrong. If it was too small, it could break just because of the tension of the wire. Also with the clips that you would hang, you have to hang at a certain height. Everything that has a process you have to follow in order for everything to work right. You don't want to connect cables before you have your panels up. It's just certain things that I learned, that everything has an order and everything has a process and a way of doing it. So if you follow that, you'll have success with construction. I learned all of these things, and I learned to have fun while doing it in a safe way. And this is my experience that I share with you. I hope you can take some from it. Maybe you're not in solar site, but you can apply in some other sites. Thank you.